My name is Patricia Lane, and I was only 12 years old when everything in my life turned upside down. That morning started like any other day. Dad kissed my forehead, smiled gently, and left the house to head to the construction site. He was a site supervisor for a civil construction company in Oregon. I still clearly remember the denim jacket he wore and how he said, "I'll bring home your favorite pastry this afternoon." That was the last thing I ever heard from him. Mom didn't even look up when Dad walked out the door. Her eyes were glued to her phone, fingers scrawling endlessly like she was drowning in an infinite stream of news. That struck me as odd. They used to talk every morning, exchange warm glances. Lately, the silence between them had stretched longer, like a void I couldn't fill. By noon, while I was sitting in science class, the principal walked in. Her face was serious, but her eyes held a deep sympathy. I was called outside, not knowing what was happening. In the principal's office, my mom was already there. Her hair was perfectly styled, her makeup untouched, and her cold eyes looked at me like I was a stranger. "Your father is gone, Patricia," she said in a disturbingly calm voice. I froze. It felt like the air around me had disappeared. I screamed on the inside, but on the outside, all I could do was cry, choked and silent. Mom placed her hand lightly on my shoulder, patting it as if she were comforting an acquaintance, not the only daughter who had just lost her father. That night, I went up to my room early but couldn't sleep. I heard Mom on the phone downstairs. Her voice was low, but every word came through the thin walls of our house. "Actually, this might be a good opportunity," she said, pausing for a moment. "Being a widow is better than being divorced. At least I get to keep everything without sharing with lawyers." Then she laughed, a short, sharp laugh like a knife's edge. I couldn't believe my ears. My father had only been gone for a few hours, and yet my mother, the woman who had held his hand through years of marriage, was saying such things without an ounce of sorrow, without a single real tear. I sat on the stairs, my hand covering my mouth to stifle the sobs, my heart aching as if it were being crushed. The only one who sensed the truth was Aunt Margaret, Dad's sister. She didn't sob loudly at the funeral, didn't offer hollow condolences like the others. She just stood quietly in the backyard, shaking her head gently whenever someone hugged my mom and said, "Poor thing." Aunt Margaret had known all along. She'd seen how Mom treated Dad, the disdain in her words when he lost his job temporarily, the irritated glances when he came home late after overtime shifts, but no one wanted to believe it. My mother always appeared polished, knew just the right words to say to fool people. Only Aunt Margaret and I saw how everything was falling apart beneath the surface. After the funeral, Mom transformed. No longer tired or sorrowful, no more red eyes. She dressed more extravagantly, wore heavier makeup, and was constantly on the phone. I once caught her tearing up a family photo with Dad in it, then tossing it into the trash without a second thought. That time, I didn't cry. I just stood there, eyes dry, because even my tears seemed to understand there was no place left for them. I had lost the person I loved most, but what hurt more was realizing I never really had a mother. 4 months after the funeral, Mom casually announced she was remarrying. She didn't sit me down or ask how I felt. She stood in the kitchen, stirring her morning coffee, and said it as if she were announcing the weather. "Patricia, Daniel and I are getting married at the end of the month." I froze in place. The spoon in my hand dropped to the floor with a cold clang. Daniel Morrison, the man who had shown up at our house a few times after Dad passed. At first, he just came by to help Mom cope with her grief, but over time, he appeared more frequently, even bringing his 2 kids, Chase, 14, and Kayla, 11. Chase always looked at me like I was from another planet, while Kayla rarely spoke, just quietly assessed me head to toe whenever her mom signaled her. I used to think I was imagining it. I wasn't. The wedding was a private ceremony in a small garden outside Boise, Idaho. I had no role in the event, wasn't asked about the dress, seating, or even if I wanted to go. Mom simply handed me a pale pink dress, and coldly said, "Don't embarrass me." After the honeymoon, Daniel and his kids moved into my house, or rather, the house that used to belong to my dad. That's when everything changed, in ways I couldn't have imagined. Kayla was given my bedroom because, as Mom put it, she's a girl and she needs space to paint. I was moved to the attic, a cramped room with rough wooden walls and a single window that was jammed shut. Chase took over my dad's study, once filled with books and sketches. It became his game room. I protested, gently. Mom responded curtly, "You need to learn to share. The world doesn't revolve around you." Every night, dinner felt like a stage play where I was just an extra. Mom filled Kayla's plate, saved the last piece of chicken for Chase while I quietly ate cold salad. When I asked, "May I have some more potatoes?" she shrugged. "You've had enough." Weekend trips began. Camping, canoeing, national park visits. I was never invited. Mom explained, "You're not into outdoor activities. Stay home and watch the cat." So I stayed, with Ginger the cat, and the growing feeling of being left behind. I called Aunt Margaret more often. Nights at her house felt like breathing again. She didn't ask many questions, just handed me a warm blanket, a cup of hot cocoa, and listened in silence. Once, while I was stacking clothes in her room, she asked softly, "Are you okay with how things are at home?" I didn't know what to say. Some truths, once spoken, hurt more than when kept inside. I just bowed my head and mumbled, "At least, I have a real bedroom here." She squeezed my hand. Her eyes held no anger, no pity, just a deep understanding that made me want to cry. One Friday afternoon, I came home from school and saw Mom and Kayla sitting together in the living room. The table was covered with markers and drawing paper. They were laughing. Mom gently untangled Kayla's hair from her sweater, smiling like I didn't even exist. That image froze me at the doorway, my chest hollow. "Patricia, walk softer," Mom snapped. "Kayla needs to concentrate." I turned away and quietly climbed the stairs to the sweltering attic. No lock on the door, no one to check on me. Just me and the wind whistling through the jammed window. That night, I pulled out a small notebook and wrote my first line. "I will not be forgotten. Not like this." I started thinking about college when I turned 17. Late afternoons in the school library, I sat alone researching business schools, scholarship programs, and dreaming of a life I could finally control. A life where I wouldn't be shoved into attics or called the extra problem, in a family I never chose. One evening, while Mom was baking for Kayla's upcoming birthday party, I gathered my courage and stepped into the kitchen. The scent of butter and vanilla lingered in the air, clashing with the heaviness in my chest. "Mom," I said, trying to stay calm, "I want to apply to the University of Minnesota. They have a great business program, and I've almost finished my application." She stopped, turned to look at me, not with surprise or emotion, but with visible irritation. "Patricia, where do you think the money for college is going to come from?" She set the cake pan on the counter, wiping her hands on her apron. "Chase is starting senior year, Kayla's got real artistic talent, and I'm planning to enroll her in an art academy out of state. You need to be realistic." I bit my lip. "What about Dad's savings?" I remember he once said. Mom frowned and cut me off with a sigh. "Are you still stuck on that? Your father didn't leave anything. Whatever was in the savings account was used for hospital bills, the funeral, and living expenses all these years. Did you think food, clothes, and a roof over your head were free?" I stood frozen, not because of her answer, but because of how she said it. As if my very existence was a burden. Still, I didn't give up. That weekend, I went to Aunt Margaret's house as usual. She made peppermint tea and the cookies still smelled fresh from the oven. We sat on the porch swing where the late afternoon sunlight stretched across the lawn like a soft blanket. I told her everything, about the conversation with Mom, about my dream of going to college, and the lingering doubt I had about the money Dad once said was set aside for me. Aunt Margaret stayed silent for a moment, then stood up and went inside. I waited, clutching my now cold teacup. When she came back, she held a small old metal box, secured with a tiny latch. "I've been keeping this for 5 years," she said, her voice low but warm. "Before your father passed, he came to see me. He was worried. He said things were changing at home and he didn't want to take any risks." My eyes widened as she handed me the box. Inside was a thick envelope, sealed tightly with tape. My hands trembled as I opened it. A bank statement fell out, and my heart pounded. Over $72,000 in the account. The beneficiary, me. The assigned trustee, Margaret Lane. "Your dad had been putting money into that account for years," Aunt Margaret said, looking at me with love. "He didn't say why exactly, but when I heard he passed and saw how things changed with your mom, I knew why he did it." I was speechless, tears threatening to spill. Part of me wanted to break down, but another part felt a surge of strength. Dad hadn't abandoned me. Even when he was gone, he was still protecting me in the quietest way. "Don't tell your mother," Aunt Margaret warned, her voice firm. "If she finds out, she'll find a way to take it. From now on, you have to keep this completely secret." I nodded. For the first time in years, hope didn't feel like a luxury. That night, I sat by Aunt Margaret's window, moonlight reflecting off the bank document in my hands. Those cold numbers now held the deepest kind of love. I didn't know what lay ahead, but I knew one thing for sure. I would fight for my future, and I would never let anyone, not even my mother, take that from me again. I kept the money a secret, just as Aunt Margaret told me to. During my senior year, I poured everything into school. Every morning, I woke up earlier than my alarm, did extra assignments, applied for scholarships, and practiced writing essays like my life depended on every word. In truth, it did. At school, Chase still made sarcastic remarks when I brought packed lunches or wore the same old jacket. "Don't worry, Patricia," he once sneered. "They still need cashiers." Kayla frequently posted pictures of the happy family online, pictures I was never in. I stayed silent, as always, because I knew I was preparing for something far greater than anything they could ever imagine. That spring, when I turned 18, I received my acceptance letter from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, majoring in business administration. I also earned a partial scholarship thanks to my grades and an essay about my determination to build a life on my own terms. I didn't show the acceptance letter to my mom. Instead, I quietly planned my departure, with Aunt Margaret's help and the money my dad had saved for me. 3 months later, I left the house where I had lived like a shadow. No farewell party, no hug. Mom just asked flatly, "Are you sure you can handle living on your own?" I smiled, nodded, and walked out the door, feeling as though I had just removed a weight I'd carried for years. College life wasn't easy, but I loved every moment of independence. I worked at a cafe near the dorms, joined academic clubs, and never passed up an internship opportunity. That's where I met Jessica Ward, a classmate whose personality was the opposite of mine. Bold, energetic, but incredibly kind. One time, while working on a marketing strategy project together, Jessica invited me to her house to prepare our presentation. I didn't expect the house to be a 3-story mansion in suburban Madison, and I certainly didn't expect her father to be Malcolm Ward, CEO of a well-known marketing firm called Ward & Cole Strategies. After our rehearsal, Mr. Ward overheard us practicing. He stepped into the room, nodded approvingly, and asked me a few questions about my market analysis. He didn't say much then, but a week later, Jessica handed me his business card and said, "My dad wants to meet you. I think he's looking for interns." That summer, I started my internship at Ward & Cole. At first, I handled small tasks, compiling data, assisting with events, making coffee. But I observed, learned, and stayed late whenever I could. When a senior employee suddenly left, I volunteered to finish her unfinished market report. That report caught Mr. Ward's attention. After graduation, I was offered a full-time position. I began as a market analyst. 4 years later, I became regional strategy lead. By year 6, I was promoted to Director of Strategic Development. At just 24 years old, every step was deliberate, each small win a brick laid in the foundation of my new life. I bought my first apartment in downtown Milwaukee. I picked out the furnishings myself. Minimalist, elegant, and nothing excessive. Then came the Mercedes-Benz GLC, a reward I gave myself after exceeding performance goals. But unlike Kayla or Chase, I didn't post photos for attention. I didn't need to. I only shared a few pictures with Aunt Margaret, the only one who knew my entire journey. She always replied, "Your father would be so proud." And I never once doubted you'd make it. I still keep a journal. Whenever I feel tired or uncertain, I open the old notebook, where Dad's handwriting is on the first page. No matter where you go, I believe you'll get to where you dream to be. Now, I'm there. The very place I once dreamed of, doubted, and fought to reach. I never returned to the old house. I hadn't heard a word from Mom, Chase, or Kayla in 6 years. Until one June morning when a strange message appeared in my voicemail, with a voice I couldn't mistake. "Patricia, it's Mom. I have something I want to talk to you about." The message came at 7 a.m., on the same day I was promoted to Regional Vice President at Ward & Cole. As I sipped my coffee on the balcony, watching Milwaukee awaken below, my phone buzzed with a simple notification. "Patricia, I'm having my 55th birthday party at Belle Rive Restaurant, Saturday, 7 p.m. You should be there. Don't make people think I didn't raise you right." No warm greeting, no explanation, just a cold demand. Exactly how she used to control my life when I was a child. Even the way she wrote "you should be there" made me laugh. Like nothing had happened all those years, like I was still stuck in the attic eating dinner alone. I planned to delete the message, but part of me, not to forgive, but to prove something, wanted to see the look on her face when she realized the daughter she once abandoned had grown up. That afternoon, I sat with Aunt Margaret in the living room, recounting the message with a smirk. She set her teacup down, watching me for a long moment. "Are you going to go?" I nodded. I don't want anything from her, but I think it's time she saw the truth she's been denying all these years. Aunt Margaret raised an eyebrow. "So, what are you going to give her?" I opened my phone and showed Aunt Margaret a confirmation email. A 3-month luxury vacation at a 6-star resort in Iceland, first-class tickets, full-service package. Total cost, $180,000. Aunt Margaret nearly dropped her glasses. "Goodness, Patricia!" I gave a soft smile. She'll never receive this trip. But I just want to see her reaction. Just once. On Saturday evening, I chose a simple black dress from a brand most people unfamiliar with fashion would mistake for something cheap. I took a taxi to Belle Rive, a fancy-looking restaurant, but I knew the truth. The food was average at best, and the price was inflated by chandeliers and background violin music. The private dining room was decorated with candles and elegant fake flowers. My mother sat in the center, her sequin dress sparkling, makeup flawless down to every detail. Next to her was Daniel, still as dull as ever. Chase and Kayla flanked them, beaming in designer outfits, acting like movie stars. When she saw me, Mom narrowed her eyes, then forced a social smile. "Oh, Patricia, you showed up on time. At least you still remember your manners." I didn't respond. I just smiled and walked toward an empty seat at the end of the table. The party unfolded like a stage play. Relatives gave ordinary gifts, which my mother praised like they were treasures. A scarf, a cosmetic set, a shopping voucher. Then it was Chase and Kayla's turn. They stood hand in hand, confidently presenting their gift like they were delivering a graduation speech. "Mom," Chase began, "Kayla and I saved up all year to get you something really special." Kayla held up her phone, showing a picture of a brand new massage chair already set up in the living room. Mom clutched her chest and feigned being overwhelmed. "Oh my! You two are the most thoughtful children in the world." Then her gaze drifted toward me. "And what about you, Patricia? I'm not expecting much, maybe a card or a handkerchief. I calmly opened my handbag, took out a small blue box neatly wrapped with a white ribbon. I pushed it toward her. Just open it and see. She took the box and glanced at it like she was judging a last-minute bargain bin item. When she opened it and saw the slip of paper inside, she frowned. What is this? I sat up straight. A reservation confirmation for Aurora Blue Resort in Iceland. 3 weeks, full-service package, first-class tickets. That's my birthday gift to you. The room fell silent. Kayla dropped her spoon, Chase's eyes widened, and Daniel stopped chewing his cake. Mom looked at the paper, then at me. Are you joking? Where did you get the money for this? I smiled, my gaze steady. I am the Regional Development Vice President at Ward & Cole. I live downtown, and the taxi I took tonight was so I didn't have to worry about parking my new Lexus I bought last week. Her face froze. No more smiling, no more sarcasm. Only shock. I stood up, gently took the box back and placed it in my bag. But you're right, if you think this gift isn't valuable enough, I'll give it to someone who truly deserves it. I turned and walked away, my heels clicking clearly across the silent room. Outside the restaurant, the summer breeze brushed through my hair. I took out my phone and sent one message to Aunt Margaret. The trip to Iceland is yours. I left Belrive behind in a heavy silence, walking away from the stunned stares of my mother and the family, who never really saw me as one of them. That night, I didn't go straight home. I stopped by Aunt Margaret's, where the lights were still on and a cup of hot tea was already waiting, as if she had known exactly how the evening would unfold. I told her everything, the way my mother belittled the gift before opening it, her shock when she saw its real value, and what I said before leaving. Aunt Margaret didn't laugh, but her eyes shimmered with pride. You did what most people never dare to, place your own worth above fake approval. I nodded, feeling lighter. I don't need her apology. I just need her silence. But silence didn't come the way I hoped. The next morning, as I was getting ready for work, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. 3 missed calls from an unknown number. Then a message arrived. Patricia, we need to talk. About last night. And about us. I didn't reply. An hour later, another call. This time from Daniel's number. I had forgotten he still used the same one. Then Kayla called. Chase sent a message. Mom is really upset. Maybe our little sister didn't need to go that far. Little sister. The phrase sounded so fake. I was never his sister, never treated like family. Yet now he used such a familiar tone, like the past never happened. That afternoon during a strategic meeting, my mother sent a long email titled in bold, "For the family." She claimed the party had been a misunderstanding, that I had overreacted, and that she wanted to start over if I truly wished to reconnect. But just a few lines later, the truth leaked out. She mentioned how Kayla really needs an internship at a reputable company to enhance her college applications, and how Chase has great business potential but needs guidance. Then, she added, if you know anyone hiring at your company, consider referring Chase. He has excellent leadership skills. I read the whole email without feeling anything, not anger, not sadness, just the sense that I was reading a shallow investment proposal, flowery language, but completely hollow. The next day, I blocked every number from my mother's family. I filtered their emails, I changed my social media privacy settings, and told our office security team that anyone with the last name Morrison should not be allowed in. Late that evening, Aunt Margaret called, her voice hesitant. Patricia, your mother came to my house this morning. I paused for a few seconds. What did she say? She wanted your address, said she had the right to see you, that a mother shouldn't be treated like a stranger by her own child. I told her she gave up that right a long time ago. I closed my eyes, imagining her standing on Aunt Margaret's porch, wearing her designer dress, makeup flawless, gripping her purse like she was bidding at an auction. Did she do anything outrageous? I asked. She did. She yelled in the street, accusing me of dividing the family, that I was selfish, and that everything she ever did was to help you succeed. I let out a quiet laugh. Succeed by locking me in an attic? I told her that. She went quiet for a while, then left, but Patricia, the look in her eyes, I think she's truly desperate this time. I didn't know what emotion I was feeling. Sadness? Pity? Or just the numbness of years of abandonment? But I knew one thing for sure. No amount of late tears could erase years of being forgotten. And coming back just for benefits could never be called love. That night, I sat alone on my sofa, gazing out at the city through my large window. I reopened the Iceland vacation email and updated the recipient's name. Margaret Lane. I added a small note. For the one woman who chose to stay, even when the world turned away. When I hit send, I wasn't just giving away a gift. I was closing a chapter of my life and stepping into the next one with my head held high. Margaret's trip to Iceland was scheduled for early September, right during the most breathtaking season of the Northern Lights. When I told her, she nearly dropped her glass. You're kidding, Patricia? Iceland? A 6-star resort? Oh my goodness, I've never even left this state. I smiled, laying the printed flight tickets and itinerary on the wooden kitchen table. No kidding. You deserve all the best things. And more. Aunt Margaret went quiet for a moment, then looked at me with an expression I'll never forget. One filled with unconditional love, pride, and deep gratitude. No fancy words, no tears. Just a warm squeeze of my hand, and it was enough. Since the night of my mother's birthday party, I had erased every trace of the past. Phone numbers, email addresses, even old belongings from the house. I had given them away or thrown them out. Not out of bitterness, but because I didn't want to hold on to anything that reminded me of a place where I felt invisible. I focused on my work and on the relationships that truly mattered. I spent more time with Aunt Margaret, cooking together on weekends, taking morning walks around Lake Geneva every Sunday. Those seemingly simple things made me feel more loved than any empty words ever spoken by the woman who used to call herself my mother. A week before the trip, I scheduled a private car to pick Aunt Margaret up at the airport, hired a local guide so she could fully enjoy everything without worry, and even booked a full-body spa session at the hotel she'd be staying in, with a view that looked out to snow-covered mountains year-round. Aunt Margaret couldn't stop laughing as I listed the plans. You're turning me into royalty. I just smiled and said softly, I'm only giving back a small piece of what you gave me. During that time, I didn't receive any more messages or calls from my mother. Maybe she finally understood that this time I had truly closed the door. No more soft spots, no second chances. Her silence was the most valuable thing she had ever given me. The day before her departure, I gave Aunt Margaret a teal silk scarf, the color of the Northern Lights I had seen in pictures. She hugged me tightly, eyes glistening. Your father must be looking down and smiling. I nodded. I believe that, too. That evening, I sat alone in my apartment, city lights twinkling behind the glass window. I pulled out my old notebook, the one I started when I was just a girl banished to the attic, and read the first line I ever wrote. I will not be forgotten, not like this. Now, I added a new line below it. And I wasn't forgotten. I created my own place, right where I belong. I closed my eyes. I no longer felt heavy or bitter. Instead, I felt peace. Like I had finally taken off the weighty coat of the past. The next morning, I dropped Aunt Margaret off at the airport. She rolled her suitcase, the teal scarf wrapped around her neck, chattering about the weather in Reykjavik and whether she should eat breakfast on the plane or at the terminal. Before entering the security checkpoint, she looked back at me, her eyes gleaming like a child about to go to summer camp. You know, Patricia, I always hoped that one day you'd live up to your full potential, but I never imagined you'd be the one helping me live my own dream. I hugged her tightly. Because you were the first person who believed in me when no one else did. She walked away, her small figure gradually disappearing behind the line of passengers. I stood there for a while, then turned and walked out of the airport, my heart light. I didn't have a big, loud family or picture-perfect posts on social media, but I had one person who was always there for me, someone who chose me every single day, not for gain, not for appearances, but simply out of love. And sometimes just one person like that is enough to be called family. From a forgotten girl living quietly in an attic, I had risen and built a life I'm truly proud of. I learned that family isn't about blood. It's about those who choose to love and stand by you unconditionally. Success doesn't come from others' approval, but from daring to believe in your own worth. And sometimes, finding happiness means having the courage to let go of what once hurt you. What do you think about Patricia's story and her courageous choices? Share your thoughts below. And don't forget to follow the channel for more heartwarming and meaningful stories about family and life. I stepped into the banquet hall, bathed in dazzling lights, where everything exuded such opulence that it bordered on ostentation. The crystal chandeliers reflected golden light onto the soft silk tablecloths, while the elegantly dressed guests raised their champagne glasses with pride. This was not a place I ever thought I would set foot in, not a place for someone who had been cast aside by her own family. But here I was, at the lavish wedding of Sophia, my younger sister. The very person who, 12 years ago, had watched me walk out of our home with cold, unfeeling eyes, without a hint of hesitation. I was not on the guest list. Of course not. Someone who had been erased from the family at 18 had no reason to show up at this perfectly curated event. But fate has a way of playing cruel jokes, and tonight was the moment I had been waiting for over a decade. Walking among the powerful and privileged, I could feel the stares burning into me, the whispers rippling through the air like waves. Naturally, I was no longer that quiet, invisible girl who silently endured their contempt. At that moment, a voice laced with disdain cut through the elegant atmosphere. "What is this, Catherine?" I turned my head and met the sharp gaze of my mother, Margaret, a woman who had never once shown me affection. She smirked, lifting her glass of champagne with a smug expression. "What is that useless girl doing here?" I kept my smile intact. It had been a long time since I had last heard her speak about me, and yet her voice still carried the same dismissive disgust, as if I were an unwanted stain on her perfect life. Sophia stood beside my mother, arms crossed, lips curling into a mocking smirk. Her extravagant wedding gown made her look like the perfect princess in everyone's eyes, but I knew the truth about Sophia. "You're not on the guest list," she said haughtily, loud enough for those nearby to stop and turn toward us. But before anyone could react, another voice rang out, this time filled with shock and a trace of fear. "Wait, she's..." The one who spoke was Daniel, Sophia's fiancé. His face suddenly turned pale, his eyes widening as he looked at me like he had just seen a ghost from the past. I raised an eyebrow, stepping toward him slowly, my heels clicking against the polished marble floor. "Do you really not know anything, Daniel?" My voice was soft, but the weight of my words was undeniable. The room fell into a sudden, heavy silence. Sophia furrowed her brows, glancing at her fiancé, as if sensing something was terribly wrong. I did not rush. I simply stood there, letting the silence stretch, allowing their gazes to remain fixated on me, waiting for everything to begin unraveling. Just as the flawless wedding Sophia had meticulously crafted was about to shatter. Daniel took a step back, his complexion visibly paling. I remained still, quietly observing the reactions of my family, the very people who had once turned their backs on me without hesitation. A part of me wanted to savor this moment longer, but I wasn't in a hurry. Because before they could fully comprehend what was happening, I wanted them to remember the night that had changed my life forever. 12 years ago, I stood at my front door, the biting cold of a New York winter night cutting through me like a blade. Snowflakes drifted silently, covering the streets in a pristine white layer that starkly contrasted with the darkness weighing down my heart. My old, battered suitcase rested at my feet, holding only a few pieces of clothing and the small belongings I had managed to grab. The door slammed shut behind me without hesitation. I remembered my mother's final words, not spoken in anger nor sorrow, but with chilling indifference. "You are worthless to this family. I've put up with you long enough." And my father? He said very little. He simply stood there, arms crossed, allowing my mother to make the decision, just like always. And Sophia, just 17 at the time, stood with her arms folded, smirking like she had just won a battle she had been waging for years. No tears, no last-minute pleas, only the freezing wind hitting my face as I stepped away from that door. A door I knew I would never be allowed to walk through again. I wandered the streets with no idea where to go, no money, no close friends I could turn to, and no one from my family called to check if I was even still alive. I curled up in the corner of an alley next to a small diner in Brooklyn, where the warmth from the kitchen vents kept me from freezing. The first night, I prayed for morning to come quickly. By the second night, I began to understand that if I didn't do something, I wouldn't survive this winter. The next morning, just as I was about to leave in search of a better place to stay, the diner's back door swung open. A middle-aged woman with graying hair tied into a tight bun stepped out. Rita, the owner of the diner. She looked at me with narrowed, calculating eyes. "If you're planning on staying here all night, at least make yourself useful." I looked up, surprised. She didn't ask why I was there. She didn't show pity. She simply tossed me a rag. "Get in the kitchen and clean up. You can eat when you're done." I didn't hesitate. I had no right to refuse. From that day on, I did every job in the diner: cleaning, serving, washing dishes, whatever Rita asked of me. I slept in a small storage room behind the kitchen, surrounded by sacks of flour and boxes of supplies. It wasn't comfortable, but at least it had a roof, an old mattress, and, most importantly, it held a sliver of hope. Every night I studied by the dim light in the storage room. I refused to let my life revolve around this kitchen forever. I wanted more. I applied for a scholarship to a business school. I knew the chances were slim, but I had nothing to lose. A few months later, when I received my acceptance letter, I collapsed onto the diner's kitchen floor and cried. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I was on the right path. The college years passed in a blur of early morning classes, late-night shifts, and countless sleepless nights spent studying. But by the time I graduated, I knew everything had changed. I was no longer the abandoned girl wandering the winter streets. I had become someone they could never have imagined. At 27, I founded my own nutrition company, Catherine Health, a brand specializing in clean supplements and functional foods. I understood the struggles of those who had once been hungry, who had counted every cent just to afford a meal. And that understanding was what fueled my company's success. Within just 5 years, Catherine Health expanded across dozens of states in the U.S. My products filled the shelves of major retailers, were recommended by doctors, and even appeared in business magazines. And yet, in all those years, not a single person from my family reached out. No messages, no calls, not even a fleeting inquiry about whether I was alive. I had become a stranger to them, and that was perfectly fine. Or at least, I thought so. Back at Sophia's wedding, I looked at Daniel, her fiancé, and let a slow smile spread across my face. "You know who I am, don't you?" I asked, my voice light as air. Daniel didn't answer, but I saw it in his eyes, the hesitation, the fear. He knew, and that meant I had not been forgotten. The only problem was, they were never prepared to see me again. Daniel still hadn't spoken, but his face said it all. The entire ballroom was now focused on me, their eyes filled with curiosity and unease. I could sense Sophia's pulse quicken as she glanced at her fiancé, then back at me, her lips pressing into a tight line. I remained composed. In a deep blue evening gown that hugged my frame perfectly, my hair swept up in an elegant bun, I was nothing like the girl they had cast aside years ago. I could see them struggling to process it, trying to understand how Catherine, the worthless daughter they abandoned, could stand before them with such poise and authority. "Daniel," I spoke slowly, locking eyes with him, "you know who I am, don't you?" Daniel swallowed hard, his grip tightening around his wineglass until his knuckles turned white. He barely had time to react before Sophia stepped forward, inserting herself between us, her voice sharp and cold. "Why are you here?" she hissed, trying to regain control. "Are you here to beg for forgiveness? Or to steal attention on my big day?" I smiled, a sharp, deliberate smile. "Forgiveness?" I tilted my head. "I think you're mistaken, Sophia." I met her arrogant gaze, letting her see exactly what she had failed to notice all these years. I was no longer the abandoned child they had discarded. There was nothing to beg for. I had come to show them the truth they had worked so hard to bury. "Catherine?" A steady voice called my name from behind. I didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Ethan, my husband, stepped beside me, placing a firm yet gentle hand on my back, a silent declaration. No theatrics, no unnecessary words. Just his presence alone was enough for everyone to sense the power and success I carried with me now. Ethan was a highly accomplished businessman, the man I had built my life with over the years. But more than that, he was the only person who had witnessed every effort, every pain, and every moment of growth that had led me to this point. And now he stood beside me, a quiet statement that I was no longer someone to be dismissed. Sophia rolled her eyes and scoffed. "Oh, so you found someone stupid enough to believe in you? How pathetic." She lifted her chin, her mocking gaze sweeping over Ethan. But I saw the flicker of unease in her eyes. "You think just because you married some rich guy, you're suddenly on my level." I blinked slowly, keeping my voice composed. "On your level, Sophia?" I let out a quiet chuckle. "If I remember correctly, you're the one who built a perfect little lie to deceive everyone here, aren't you?" I saw her expression darken. "What are you talking about?" I calmly reached into my clutch, pulling out a neatly folded document. I held it up, steady and deliberate. "This is your academic record from medical school," I said, my tone as light as ever, but each word struck her like a knife. "Or rather, the proof that you were expelled in your second year." A heavy silence fell over the ballroom. Sophia froze. For a split second, pure panic flashed across her face before she quickly masked it. "You're lying." "Am I?" I shrugged, turning to Daniel. "If you don't believe me, feel free to check for yourself. Surely you wouldn't want to marry someone who doesn't even have a legitimate degree, right?" Daniel stiffened. It was clear this was the first time he was hearing any of this. "Sophia?" His voice was hoarse, filled with doubt. "Tell me she's lying." Sophia whipped around, snapping at him. "Of course she is. Don't listen to her." But it was too late. The sheer panic in her eyes had already exposed the truth. And I wasn't finished yet. "Not only did you lie about graduating," I continued, my voice eerily calm, "but you also deceived the medical system, your patients, and even your own fiancé." Daniel's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" I slowly placed another document on the table. "Your medical license, Sophia. Or, should I say, your fake medical license." This time, the murmurs in the crowd erupted into full-blown whispers. I could see Dr. Matthews, a renowned physician and someone my family once boasted about knowing, standing at a distance, his face a mask of shock. Daniel slowly picked up the paper, skimmed through it, then abruptly looked at Sophia with disappointment. "You forged documents to pretend to be a doctor?" Sophia opened her mouth, but no words came out, because she knew. She had lost. And I knew this show was just beginning. Daniel stared at the paper in his hands, the trust he once had for Sophia now replaced with doubt and disillusionment. The entire ballroom was drowning in heavy silence, broken only by the growing whispers of the guests. They were beginning to realize that the grand wedding they were attending was not a fairy tale, but a disaster about to explode before their eyes. Sophia tried to regain her composure, but I could see her hands trembling. "You think a meaningless piece of paper like this can ruin me?" Her voice was defiant, but the tension in her eyes betrayed her. "Daniel, don't believe her. She's just trying to stir up drama." Daniel slowly shook his head. "But you never told me about this, Sophia. If it's all a lie, Why do you look so nervous? Sophia opened her mouth to argue, but I didn't give her the chance. I slowly reached into my clutch and pulled out a small USB, holding it up for everyone in the ballroom to see. Sophia, did you really think all I had was a single document? I smiled, but there was no warmth in my eyes. No, I came prepared for much more than that. The entire room fell silent. I could see Margaret, my mother, clutching her champagne glass so tightly that her fingers turned pale. Richard, my father, sat motionless at the table, his jaw clenched, a clear sign that he knew what was coming. I turned to Daniel. Do you have a laptop here? Daniel looked up, blinking a few times as if trying to process everything happening around him. Finally, he nodded. Yes, over at the sound booth. I turned on my heel, walking slowly toward the DJ's station where a laptop rested on the control panel. I didn't need to say a word. Daniel followed me, as if some part of him already knew that something far worse was coming. Sophia panicked. Daniel stopped, but it was too late. Daniel took the USB from my hand and plugged it into the laptop. The large projector screen behind the stage lit up. Files began appearing one by one. I pressed a key and document after document opened. Financial records, bank statements, undeniable proof of money being funneled into untraceable accounts. And then the insurance records from Morelli Family Care Clinic, the very clinic my family had been running for over a decade. I turned back to my father. Dad, did you really think no one would uncover your fraudulent medical claims? The entire room turned to look at Richard. He gripped the armrests of his chair, his face pale as a sheet. You don't know what you're talking about, Catherine. His voice was unsteady, but I wasn't going to let him manipulate his way out of this. I pressed another key and the screen displayed a financial report. Clear evidence that my father had been using my identity to evade taxes for over a decade. The ballroom erupted in gasps. Some guests shook their heads in disbelief, others exchanged wary glances. I looked at my father, and for the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. You used my social security number to file fake income reports, create fraudulent tax deductions, and launder money through your clinic, I said, pausing for a moment before tilting my head. Did you really think I wouldn't find out? Margaret shot up from her seat. You're lying. No one will believe you. I didn't even look at her. Instead, I turned back to Daniel. This isn't just some minor financial scandal, I said. If you look closely, you'll see that Sophia's involved too. She stole another intern's identity to issue prescriptions and collect insurance payouts. Daniel didn't say a word. He turned to Sophia, his face filled with pain. You lied to me about all of this? His voice was hoarse. Sophia frantically shook her head. No, it's all lies. I let out a quiet chuckle. If you're so sure, then why don't you explain what's on that screen? Sophia trembled. Daniel looked at her for a long moment, then slowly reached for his ring finger. I was ready to spend my entire life protecting you, he said bitterly. But it turns out the woman I was about to marry is nothing but a fraud. He pulled off his wedding ring and threw it to the floor. The sharp sound of metal hitting marble echoed through the silent ballroom. Sophia gasped, stumbling backward as if she was about to collapse. But no one cared anymore. The crowd had already begun murmuring, some guests discreetly leaving their tables while others exchanged knowing glances. I took a step back, watching as everything Sophia had built crumbled right in front of her. Sophia stood frozen in the middle of the ballroom. Her engagement ring lay abandoned at her feet, reflecting the golden light of the chandelier above. But no one picked it up. Tears welled in her eyes, but no one cared anymore. Daniel had left. The perfect wedding she had spent years crafting had collapsed in a single night. The room was in chaos. Some guests rushed to leave while others stood transfixed, their faces filled with a mix of curiosity and fear. Whispers of the Morelli family's involvement in financial fraud and medical malpractice spread like wildfire. Margaret, my mother, desperately tried to keep her composure, but I could see her hands shaking as she clutched her expensive handbag, as if holding onto it tightly would somehow restore her world to what it once was. Don't listen to her, Margaret suddenly shrieked, her voice losing all control. "She's always been jealous, always trying to destroy this family." I smiled, stepping closer to her, my voice soft but sharp. "Is that so? Then why don't we call the IRS? Or maybe the hospital where Sophia supposedly works? I'm sure they'd love to hear about this." The truth was, they already knew. Just as I finished speaking, a loud ringing cut through the air. Richard, my father, hurriedly pulled his phone from his suit pocket. His face had already been tense, but as soon as he glanced at the screen, his expression completely drained of color. Morelli Family Care Clinic was calling. He rejected the call, but only seconds later another voice spoke up from the crowd. Dr. Collins, a well-known physician from the hospital, took a step forward. His voice was grave. "Richard, the hospital is requesting your immediate presence." Dr. Collins' voice was firm as he looked at my father, his eyes filled with suspicion. "They've just uncovered multiple forged prescriptions under Sophia's name. All of them are tied to your clinic." A new wave of murmurs rippled through the crowd. Sophia immediately shook her head in panic. "No, I didn't do anything. Someone must have forged my name," she screamed, her voice trembling. But no one believed her anymore. And then, right at that moment, the doors to the ballroom swung open. 2 police officers stepped inside. The entire room fell silent, holding its breath. I wasn't the one who called them, but I knew that once the truth was exposed, someone would act before I even had to. One of the officers stepped forward, his voice calm yet commanding. "Richard Morelli, you need to come with us for questioning regarding allegations of financial fraud and insurance malpractice." I glanced at my father. For the first time in my life, I saw true fear in his eyes. "This is a mistake," he tried to argue, but no one believed him anymore. Sophia burst into tears, rushing to grab his arm. "Dad, do something. They can't take us away like this." "Dad?" I repeated, raising an eyebrow. "Sophia, did you really think he was the only one involved in this?" One of the officers turned to Sophia, then spoke. "Miss Morelli, we will also need you to come in for questioning regarding the falsification of medical credentials." Sophia completely broke down. "No, I didn't do anything," she screamed, tears streaming down her perfectly made-up face. But no one came to help her. Margaret turned to her daughter, then to her husband, as if desperately searching for someone to salvage the situation. But then, she realized it was over. Some guests quietly slipped out. Others pulled out their phones, recording the spectacle as it unfolded. The Morelli family's reputation, the legacy my mother had spent her life protecting, was crumbling before her very eyes. She turned back to me, her eyes filled with hatred. "You destroyed this family." I let out a soft chuckle, my expression unshaken. "No, Mother," I said evenly. "You all destroyed yourselves a long time ago. I just made sure the world saw the truth." Richard lowered his head, saying nothing as the officers secured handcuffs around his wrists. Sophia continued sobbing, begging in vain. But no one cared anymore. And me? I just stood there, watching everything fall apart. Calm, proud, and with absolutely no regrets. Richard was escorted out of the ballroom in silence. The crowd parted to let the officers pass, but no one spoke up to defend him. His entire life he had been the one in control, the one making all the decisions. But in this moment, all the power he once held had vanished in a single night. Sophia knelt on the floor, her trembling hands clutching at her expensive wedding gown, now stained by the ruins of her own downfall. Once a perfect princess, she was now nothing more than a broken woman, exposed in front of everyone. She had no fiancé, no dignity, and most importantly, no one left to believe in her. Margaret, my mother, stood frozen. I could see it in her eyes. She wanted to do something, to say something that could turn the situation around. But for the first time in her life, she realized that she no longer had control over anything. I took a step forward, facing the man who once declared that I was unworthy of being part of this family. Richard lifted his head to look at me, his expression filled with resentment. "You think you've won?" His voice was hoarse, thick with anger. "You're nothing but a traitor. I never considered you my daughter." The entire ballroom fell silent. Everyone was waiting for my reaction. But I simply stood there, calm and composed, as if I had been waiting for this moment my entire life. I leaned down slightly, looking him straight in the eye. "Your family was lost a long time ago. You just never realized it." Not a hint of rage, not a trace of sorrow. I spoke the words as if they were nothing more than facts, and the truth was, they were. Richard opened his mouth to argue, but then he saw it. There was no one left on his side. He had destroyed everything with his own hands. Margaret clutched her designer handbag tightly, her face pale. She glanced around, as if searching for someone still loyal to the Morelli family, but everyone had turned their backs on them. The guests who once praised them, the colleagues who once respected them, now only wary stares and hushed whispers remained. Sophia let out a quiet sob. "Catherine, you can't do this to me." I turned to look at her. For the first time tonight, her voice was no longer sharp, no longer filled with mockery. Instead, it was drenched in desperation. "You did this to yourself, Sophia," I said softly but firmly. She collapsed further, unable to argue. I took a deep breath, feeling the crisp night air fill my lungs. I had done what I came here to do. A warm hand rested on my back. I didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Ethan, the man who had always stood by me, the one person whose loyalty I had never doubted. "Let's go, Catherine," he said gently, but I could hear the pride in his voice. I gave a slight nod. There was nothing left here for me. We walked out of the ballroom, passing curious stares and hushed murmurs, but no one dared to stop me. I was no longer the weak girl they had so easily cast aside. Outside, the cool evening air wrapped around me like a soft embrace. I exhaled slowly, feeling as if I had just set down a weight I had carried for over a decade. Ethan opened the car door for me, but before stepping in, I realized there was one more thing I wanted to do before this night ended. I turned to him, my eyes gleaming with a spontaneous idea. "Ethan, do you want to get some cake?" He blinked, momentarily surprised by my question, but then a smile quickly spread across his face. "Cake?" He chuckled. "Absolutely. We have something to celebrate, after all." I laughed, feeling a lightness spread through me, not because I had sought revenge, but because I had truly freed myself. We drove to a small bakery on the corner of the street, its warm golden light spilling through the windows. I ordered a slice of red velvet cake, while Ethan got a piece of cheesecake. I picked up my fork, cutting into the cake and taking a bite. The sweetness melted on my tongue instantly, but the best part was knowing that I could finally enjoy it, without any burden weighing on me. Ethan watched me, his gaze filled with warmth. "How do you feel now?" he asked. I took a sip of my tea, letting its slight bitterness linger for a moment. Then I set my cup down and smiled. Free. That was my real victory. Not the downfall of the Morelli family, not the exposure of their secrets, but the fact that, at last, I was no longer bound by my past. Catherine's story is not just about reclaiming justice. It's a powerful lesson on freedom and self-worth. Sometimes the people we love most are the ones who turn their backs on us first. But what truly matters is not how we are abandoned, but how we rise again. Catherine never sought revenge. She only demanded fairness and proved that a person's worth is not defined by those who discard them, but by how they rebuild their own life. And that is the true victory. What do you think of Catherine's story? If you were in her situation, how would you have faced it? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to follow the channel for more inspiring stories about life and family.